Hello everyone and welcome to this month's masterclass, which is all about mental health and well-being, and as such I decided that we would have a little bit of a chilled version to this masterclass. So we're actually going to hang out in my kitchen and have a cup of tea because mental health awareness is something that is obviously growing and all that kind of stuff, but there's still an element of medicinalness, I think, sometimes when we're talking about mental health. So I actually think that if we encourage a much more chilled way to talking about the fact that maybe we don't feel awesome the whole time, that actually then means that people will, I don't know, feel a bit freer and easier about talking about whether they're struggling or whether they need a little bit of help or whatever it might be. And yes, so that's why I thought we would do, tea in my kitchen, and I'll give about 30 seconds more and then we will get cracking. Actually, you know what? We'll just dive on in now. Okay. So mental health is something that I will not be able to cover in half an hour in total, but it's an incredibly complex sort of area to deal with. But I've tried to simplify it down into sort of three interconnected contributory elements, which sort of makes it easier to kind of just break up a little bit. So our first one would be, is the nervous system working properly? Second one would be, do you have adequate and appropriate levels of nutrition for the body as a whole to allow the nervous system to function well and therefore you to be mentally stable? And then your environmental influence. And this is something that's quite a cool area of research, and it's referred to as exposome science. So your exposome is the total of all your life exposures and their impacts on health, and these start before you're born, which we would refer to something as like an antecedent or a predisposition, and then they sum up over the course of your life, and you have an internal and an external exposome. So your internal exposome would be your internal influx to your exposome would be things like your genetics, and then your external bits would be like the environment that you live in, your support network. So I'm going to now try and go through these three sections to help you understand them a little bit more and how you might positively impact them, or how you might suddenly realize that maybe they're negatively impacting you and you didn't know that. So anyway, okay. So if we start off with the nervous system, is it working properly? You have two branches to your autonomic nervous system, your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous systems, and we need both of them. And it's actually the relative dominance of them to each other, so the ratio between the amount of time you spend in your sympathetic nervous system dominance versus your parasympathetic nervous system dominance, that's the bit that's actually really important. And what we find is that a lot of people now will live too much in their sympathetic nervous system, and that isn't designed to actually be a long-term measure. It's your fight or flight response, so it's your survival mechanism. And as a result, it adjusts lots of different things in your body. So it makes your blood pressure go up, it makes your breathing rate go up, it makes your stress hormone levels go up, it makes your insulin levels go up. Now that's really important in sort of like a short-lived response. So for example, if you see a car rushing towards you, you want to really quickly get out of the way, and then you'll remain slightly heightened for a little while because your body doesn't necessarily know that it was a car. Your brain's just a control center in a black box. It doesn't know where the risk signal came from. So it'll just keep you on a heightened state of awareness just for a short period of time to make sure that there's no other threats to your survival you might need to then sort of like bounce back against. It could have been originally the whole like running away from a lion or a tiger situation. You don't know if there's another one coming. Like, well, now do we know if there's another car coming? So the thing about the sympathetic nervous system is it also turns off your rational brain, which is the interesting thing. So we have different parts of our brain that, depending on whether we are in parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system dominance, will be in charge of our thought process and thus our emotions and our emotional stability. When you're in sympathetic nervous system dominance, so fight or flight response, part of your brain called the amygdala is in charge, and that is associated with fear-related learning. It's also about making quick decisions. So if you were asked something when you were very calm, you would go through sort of decision checkpoints, basically, based on historical interactions with things, or if you haven't been in that situation before, then you'll use bits and pieces that you have been exposed to, and you'll make a logical decision, and you'll come to it, and you'll feel good about it, and that's absolutely fine. If you're in sympathetic nervous system response, the amygdala just goes from A to Z without doing that, just so that it makes sure that you get to the end point, which is still being alive. Now, if you can imagine that as a situation when you're, say, walking into an office and you've got your colleagues around you and you're in parasympathetic nervous system dominance, and I don't know, you walk in and somebody says something to you and maybe they say it in like a slightly jokey but slightly sarcastic manner, you'll laugh and you'll go, oh, I get the sarcasm, that's absolutely fine, kind of funny. Maybe you'll respond and you'll move on with your day. If you're in sympathetic nervous system response, you're looking for threat everywhere, and all of a sudden that simple sarcastic comment goes, hold on, are they saying something awful about me? Did I do something wrong? Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And it sends you on a spiral without rationally thinking about what the interaction actually was. So if you're constantly living in that, you can see how very quickly that's going to compromise your mental health, because you are constantly looking for threat wherever you are. And progressively over time, your body can't keep responding in that acute way and it gets really tired. So you deplete your adrenals, your adrenaline levels. And then what you're trying to do is sort of live in a cortisol dominant state, which is your other stress hormone. And that just perpetuates this idea of being in sort of fear-related learning. And you're going to constantly think that you need to be on the defense rather than being able to live in a situation where you can measure your response based on that logical checkpoint system within your brain. So when it comes to making sure for our mental health that the nervous system is working properly, if you think about the cumulative stimuli that you go through in your day, so whether that's electric light, whether it's having stimulants like caffeine at some point during your day in the morning or later, maybe you aren't balancing your nutrition correctly, are you sleeping well? And I don't mean are you getting into bed and passing out for between 6 to 9 hours. I mean, are you getting really good quality, rejuvenating rest that then makes you feel vital when you wake up in the morning? Are you on your phone when you're eating? Are you stressed about work? Do you have stuff going on in your family life? Are you doing lots of endurance exercise? All of those things are triggers for the sympathetic nervous system. And a lot of them are unmodifiable in certain situations. If you have work pressure, I mean, you can get better at coping with work pressure, but unless you can give up your job, which a lot of people can't, you will probably continue to be exposed to that stressor. So when it comes to mental health and well-being and the nervous system function, we need to get really good at investing time into living in a parasympathetic nervous system response as much as possible. And this is where things like breath work really help, because measuring your breathing automatically tells your body that it's safe and secure. So this is where box breathing comes from. So that's breathing in a cycle of 4. So in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, like you're breathing around a box. Or you can do it where you actually elongate the exhale, which for some people who become more anxious more quickly will find better, because it actually encourages them to not hyperventilate. So you breathe in for 2, you hold for 4, and you breathe out for 7. If your sleep is not particularly good, you can do that before you go to bed at night. And the benefits of doing it just generally within your routine are cumulative over time, because what you're telling your body progressively is to be less trigger happy. It's got this sort of automatic breaker switch between the two parts of the nervous system, and what you just want to do is you want it to come away a little bit from the trigger button that goes quick fight or flight, and actually hang out in rest and digest, which is what we term parasympathetic nervous system dominance. And yes, also if you are finding you are a very stressed and anxious person, change your exercise routine. Try to look at things that will still keep you physically strong and your stamina up, but maybe swap away from doing long endurance exercise, just because the thing about that is it produces lots of stress hormones, which is why we get a buzz from it, but it does progressively deplete us over time. And do think about your stimulant intake. If you are somebody who's feeling a little bit jazzy or maybe a little bit on edge, cut your stimulant intake in half. Or if you're a big coffee person, go to something like an organic Swiss water filtered decaf. You've got to be careful of decafs that they're not chemically filtered, but I really like the Decadent Decaf Company for coffee. And look out for things like refined sugar as well. Oh, also you could swap from coffee to matcha and just see if the L-theanine content of matcha actually takes the edge off. Or ceremonial cacao is a big favourite of mine. Gives you a very lovely antioxidant rich stimulation, but it's much more clear and stable over the course of the day. And because the ceremonial cacao also contains some naturally occurring fats, it just helps to modulate the nervous system response as well. So there would be a couple of things to start off with section 1, which kind of swings me straight into perfectly this idea of adequate and appropriate nutrition. And I've used those two words quite specifically, and I'll explain why in a second. But the first point I do want to make here is when it comes to mental health, you have to assess digestive health and digestive efficacy, because it's integral for a couple of different reasons. The first one is you could be eating the absolutely most wonderfully nutrient-dense, nourishing for the nervous system diet, but if you can't get to the nutrients inside those foods because your digestive system isn't working properly, you may as well be eating cardboard, because your body will actually, I mean, that's being a little bit harsh, but at the same point, if you can't break down and assimilate your nutrition because your digestive system is off, then it's not going to help you in any way. And a lot of the time, things like digestive dysfunction disorders, the first symptoms that you will see will actually be anxiety, depression, insomnia, symptoms of the nervous system rather than symptoms of digestive dysfunction, because of that interaction there, of that lack of nutrition or misfiring that happens as a result. The other thing is that your digestive system is part of your nervous system. It's often called the second brain, and there is huge swathes of evidence to show that your gut microbiome actually interacts directly with your brain and your nervous system through something called the vagus nerve, which I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's why probiotics are used as a part of a treatment protocol for depression now. And it's also half of the reason that if you are very constipated, you feel really moody. The other part is that if you are constipated, you're going to re-assimilate toxins that should have been passing out through the body that you've already broken down. Your metabolic waste will then have an opportunity to go back into circulation. But there is that thing that constipation makes you feel crap. You also have, I think, about 70% of your serotonin receptors are in your gut, and serotonin is your happy hormone. So there are more serotonin receptors in your gut than there are in your brain, which is why it's so important all of a sudden to look after your digestion. Serotonin is actually a part of your peristaltic contraction, so that intestinal wave that makes you go to the toilet. It's part of passing a bowel movement. And again, issues with serotonin can then correlate with constipation. So lots of different things to think about. So yes, make sure that your gut health is absolutely on point. If we then talk about nutrition as a whole, the adequate bit that I was saying is if you are undernourished in terms of total nutrition, your nervous system can't function properly, because simply your nervous system is made of fat. Your neurotransmitters, so your hormones of the nervous system, your chemical messages of the nervous system, almost spilled my tea, are made of protein, made of amino acids, and your nervous system is fueled by carbohydrate. So if you're totally underdoing your nutrition, you are not going to get your nervous system to work properly, and you will feel very on edge, or your mood will be very unstable as a result. And yes, so a lot of the time if people are under eating, they will feel very irritable as well, because the thing that will also happen is their blood sugar will go up and down, and their stress hormones will have to take over as a result. And in terms of those carbohydrates, or just the general energy that you're taking over the course of the day, 50% of the total energy that you eat on any one day goes to your brain and your nervous system. So think about all of the other stuff that we think of as being really important, like our muscles and all of that kind of stuff. Everywhere else in your body will use half of that, and then half of all of your food just goes to your brain because it's functioning constantly and using up so much energy. So if we talk about a little bit about specific foods and nutrients, let's start with fats. So I guess the three top ones we talk about when it comes to the brain and nervous system and thus mental health are omega-3, cholesterol and choline. So cholesterol is actually the structural fat of the brain, along with DHA, which is a form of omega-3. And if this is why, with the onset of massive statin usage and for cardiovascular concerns and high cholesterol, we've seen a huge rise in neurodegeneration, because with inadequate cholesterol levels, the brain just can't repair itself over time. So I'm not talking about, well, actually, I don't know how much people understand about cholesterol, but we only take in from our diet 10% of the cholesterol that we'll actually use. We make 90% in our cells because it's so important. So you have a little breaker switch in your digestive tract that basically says, we've got enough at the moment, don't take up any more from our diet. But otherwise we would get it from things like eggs are a fantastic source. Yes, we get it from the natural fats that we find in protein, like animal proteins. And so it's really important not to underdo your cholesterol. And if you are seeing a doctor who says that your cholesterol should be like 4.2 or below, then tell them to come and see me and I'll have a strong word with them, because it's far more complex than that, and a total level of around between 5 to 7, as long as the ratio of the forms is proper, will actually be indicative of long-term optimal neurological health, as opposed to what they claim to say otherwise. Choline is a phospholipid, and seeing as we're talking about, well, seeing as I'm here hijacking Lipolife's feed, choline is within the phospholipid, the sunflower phospholipid that they use for the encapsulation within the liposomal products. So as a way to get that, in addition from getting it from things like egg yolks, you will get it when you use the liposomal products. And it's partly why it's used, because it's exactly the same in terms of, can't think of the word. It looks exactly the same chemically as the structure of a cell membrane, which is why your body can assimilate the liposomal nutrients so well and why they're so bioavailable. So yes, and then omega-3, you got a couple of different, well, you actually have a few different forms. If we look at the end point of the active forms of omega-3 that we get from oily fish, you have EPA and DHA. DHA is the structural fat of the brain and EPA is the functional fat of the brain. So during fetal brain development, so during infancy, pregnancy, following any kind of traumatic brain injury and in old age, we need a higher amount of DHA to help the brain structure to be maintained and to rebuild. Whereas during the kind of like life stage in between, kind of once you've got to being a teenager and when you start to class yourself as being sort of over about 55, you would need a little bit more EPA. But you do have the plant-based forms, which will be converted to EPA and DHA, and some of the plant-based forms do have additional uses. Sort of like ALA will have uses for things like eye structure and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to actually talking about mental health, the best evidenced forms of omega-3 are EPA and DHA. And actually, again, when it comes to alleviating symptoms of clinical depression, a therapeutic dose of omega-3 is really important to add into somebody's routine. And we're talking between 2 to 4 grams per day. A lot of the time you'd need to look on the bottle or the capsules or whatever you're getting, because they'll standardize the dose to say 2 capsules per day, but they'll actually only give you 600 milligrams of omega-3 with like much less of the 2 functional forms when you look at the breakdown. So just make sure that you're achieving that 2 to 4 grams. The only contraindication to using a high therapeutic dose of omega-3 would be if you're on something like an anticoagulant, because in addition to being really supportive of nervous system function, it does thin the blood in a good way. But obviously, if you're on a pharmaceutical blood thinner, you don't want to enhance that action too much, otherwise you're at risk of a bleeding disorder. So just be aware of that. But they are kind of your top fats for the nervous system. When it comes to things like saturated fats, we do need about 10% within our diet, and you just want to make sure that you're getting them from really good quality sources. So saturated fats from, say, really good quality grass-fed red meat, fantastic. A little bit from coconut oil, brilliant. A little bit from just natural animal fats, absolutely fine. Things like ghee and butter, but just don't be going for the processed saturated fats, because there'll also be trans fats within them, which basically means their chemical structure is being broken and switched around, so you get kind of like a mirror image, and they go around in the body and they cause imagine them like a little pinball bouncing around, causing huge amounts of inflammation, then causing irritation and issues with long-term health as a result. But don't forget about saturated fats, they are important. We just need about 10% of our dietary intake of fats should be saturated and 90% should be unsaturated, and used cold if they're unsaturated. Okay, so if we talk about protein a little bit more, protein is something that people talk about a lot when it comes to general sort of health, and there are a couple of bits to think about here. So from the neurotransmitter synthesis side of things, so these chemical messengers within the nervous system, you basically need a diverse array of them. A couple of them are particularly useful. So for example, from poultry, you'll get tryptophan, which is then converted via a few enzymatic pathways with some cofactor nutrients to become serotonin, which then becomes melatonin. So happy hormone, sleep trigger hormone. I don't want to call it a sleepy hormone because it's not actually a sleepy hormone. It just helps your body to learn that it's about time to go to bed. From red meat, you'll get heme iron, which is the form that you need to do a lot of those conversions to create these neurotransmitters from their precursor amino acid. So the tryptophan is a precursor amino acid, serotonin and melatonin are the neurotransmitters. From eggs and shellfish, you'll get cholesterol, but you also get lots of zinc. And eggs, actually, they're like nature's little superfood. They contain everything apart from vitamin C. So really go for your eggs if you can do. Small oily fish, you'll get your really good quality omega-3s. And I use the SMASHED acronym. So you want to be going for wild fish, not organic fish, because in order to be an organic fish you have to farm it, because how else would you standardise a fish being organic unless you kept it in a kind of a net, because you can't. Anyway, so you want salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring and trout. They're your top ones. If you do like things like tuna, try and keep them to about once or twice a month. The reason being that as you go up the food chain, you precipitate toxins, and we know that we have issues with things like heavy metals within the within aquatic environments and within the oceans. So by the time you've got to a top predatory fish, they've accumulated all of the little bits of toxins from the layers below. So try and go for the small ones where you're not going to have that as an issue. And then also from things like organic soy, you'll get your phytoestrogen. So again, when it comes to mental health, quite important to make sure that your reproductive hormones are in good balance and in good quantities. And this is why when women will go through the menopause, as their estrogen levels start to drop, they can find the use of phytoestrogenic foods beneficial, because although they won't actually have the same action as endogenous estrogen that they would have produced, they can sort of chemically mimic it at a low level, and that will just help to sort of balance feelings of anxiety or insomnia or loss of sense of self, or lots of different things that come in with that. But the menopause is a conversation for another day. But diverse forms of protein, really important, and adequate amounts of protein, because the other thing that does is it makes sure that your blood sugar levels are regulated. And good regulated blood sugar means good regulated adrenal response, which means happy, clappy hormones and mood balance. Again, very long, in-depth discussion for another day, but try and make sure that as an adult you're achieving between 30 to 40 grams of protein per meal. And that would mean that for an adult, even if you were doing that, so if you were doing 30 grams of protein per day, you'd still need a little bit more. So as an example, I am a lean individual and I'm not massively tall. I'm 5'8"-ish, and I need at least 115 grams of protein per day. And so in addition to having 30 grams at each meal, I supplement with additional protein-rich snack, or I make sure that I get some extra protein in over the course of the day, and that keeps my blood sugar regulation absolutely rock solid, and therefore me as happy and clappy and healthy as I could possibly be. So if you are feeling like your mood does go up and down, you get a little bit sort of hangry before meals, you find you can be a bit weepy, anything like that, or you just don't feel like you have that measured response you'd like to, especially if you're tired, make sure, just try increasing your protein intake per meal, and just have a look. If you Google what does 30 grams of protein look like, you'll pull up tables of things that sort of say like this much chicken, this much X, this much that, so you can actually quantify it in terms of a serving size. But usually the way that you can eye it is about a portion sort of that size of an animal source should get you there. But for example, 2 eggs isn't going to give you 30 grams of protein, so you would need to add in something extra, whether that's additional egg whites or really good quality cottage cheese or something into a meal to achieve that. You will get accumulation from things like beans and pulses and that kind of stuff, but I would class those, if you're trying to sort of balance mood, I would class those as a carbohydrate, and I would look to making sure that you're getting additional protein from somewhere else too. Another group would be your colourful whole foods, because they're going to be your cofactor nutrients and antioxidants. And you need all of those cofactor nutrients to take those raw materials and convert them into their end point. So making sure that you're having lots of diverse fruit and vegetables. Yes, that is my door buzzer. I don't know what they want. I'm not going to go and look at it. We'll see what happens. Lots of those kind of, all your colourful fruit and veg, nuts and seeds. You can put some like beans and pulses and legumes would also contribute here, but they're going to give you all those vitamins and minerals that then actually help those enzymes to work to take, say, the amino acids from your poultry and turn the tryptophan into serotonin and melatonin. So let's talk about what those things would be. So top nutrients. Also, I'll say at this point, lipolife have been very kind, because they're already running their January sale, but what they've done is they've let me go through their compendium of supplements and pick the ones that I think are most fitting for this sort of this live. And if you use the code NATNOURISH20 at the end of this session on the list that I'm going to go through, you get 20% off for a short period of time. And I picked out my top ones, some of which you probably have heard of, some of which you might not know about. So we'll just run through them very quickly. So I picked out serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine as some neurotransmitters that people either might be aware of or might understand their responses to, or that kind of thing. So serotonin and melatonin are your happy and your sleepy inducing hormones. So in order to make serotonin from tryptophan, you would need your B vitamins, so specifically methylfolate and B12 and B6 and B5, a lot of them. You would also need magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin E, and then also your omega-3 and that kind of stuff. But you need all of those in good levels to make serotonin. So now you can see why having a diverse diet is so important for mental health. Then for dopamine, so dopamine is also part of your mood response, but it's sort of like your thrill-seeking response hormone. It makes you feel good. It's that thing that when you do something and you feel elated afterwards, dopamine is part of that. And low levels of dopamine, or sort of insensitivity to dopamine because the receptors aren't working properly, are linked to low mood, issues with things like ADHD, schizophrenia, and also you then have the actual conditions of low dopamine, which would be things like Parkinson's and dyskinesia. So for dopamine synthesis, which comes from a slightly different precursor amino acid, you also need all of your B vitamins, you need magnesium, and you need vitamin C, and then you also need sulfur in part of that as well. The other one that I thought was quite interesting that people don't think about so much anymore is iodine. Iodine is a nutrient, it's a trace mineral that we don't need huge amounts of, but we would have previously eaten quite a lot of things like sea vegetables, so seaweeds. We don't eat those things that much anymore. And for a while, lots of governments iodized table salt because they wanted to make sure that people were getting adequate iodine. It's also very important for things like bone development and bone function. So you'll see if you look in a prenatal nutrient that there is always iodine there because it's so important when a baby's brain is developing that the mother has adequate iodine. You could just make sure that you were eating your sea vegetables on a regular basis, but I have put potassium iodide within my little selection of things if you wanted to have a look at them. The other part of that as well is that iodine is a key nutrient for thyroid hormones. Now, if you already have a diagnosed thyroid disorder, then you would not just take iodine without consulting with your physician or your sort of caring consultant because you don't want to overdo it. But a lack of iodine then causing issues with thyroid will then cause symptoms of anxiety, depression, mood instability, and all that kind of stuff. So I thought I'd just highlight that one. Vitamin D is actually referred to as a hormone, so it acts like a neurotransmitter. It's one of the nutrients that's key for nervous system function, but it's also really important as a neuroprotective agent, and it's now actually been found to help remove beta amyloid plaques from the brain in the beginnings of Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's is degradation of brain tissue, which then causes memory loss and dementia. And high levels of vitamin D have been shown to help clear the plaques that start to degrade in the brain. So making sure you've got an optimal vitamin D level will keep your mood wonderfully balanced, but it'll also protect your brain long term. So that's quite an important one. And yes, there is a vitamin D in my list. I popped the omega-3 in there as well. And it's a beautiful liposomal form, so it'll be taken up wonderfully. And it's a lovely one to use, and it works really, really well, and it's got that key therapeutic level in it, and it's also very stable, because the thing about omega-3 is it's a fat, but it's very vulnerable to oxidation. So by encapsulating it into a liposome, you protect it from oxidation. You don't have to worry about the fact that it might taste fishy and weird over time. Oh, it's a vegan version as well. So yes. And what else did I put in there? I also put in some of the multi-nutrients, so they're sort of like combinations of vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin K2. So if you didn't want to buy the products sort of autonomously, like individuals, then you can get some of the combined ones. There's a multivitamin, and then there's one that's sort of like 4 nutrients together. And then the other one that I thought was quite fun was resveratrol. Resveratrol is the compound that we talk about in purple grapes, that people go, oh yes, it's going to help you live longer. So resveratrol is an antioxidant. It's a polyphenol, fantastic, but it's also a neuroprotective agent, and it regulates brain function. So when it comes to things like learning behaviours, anxiety, symptoms, anxiety, depression, and mood disorders and sort of like memory issues, resveratrol protects the brain from the inflammatory process that's going on there, that's causing those, and actually sort of improves those symptoms. So I really like using resveratrol. Going back to, again, if I mentioned just menopausal mood change, because it's quite a big topic. Resveratrol is incredibly good there, but it is also just really useful when there's sort of like a stress response that you can tell is causing somebody to become less sharp. Do you know what I mean? If when you are sort of distracted or you feel stressed, you can't remember what you're doing a lot of the time. You can remember things from a while ago, but your short-term memory sort of stops. That's part of the fear-related learning thing. You don't need to be able to make short-term memory when you're trying to survive. But resveratrol is very, very useful in terms of just bringing you back from that edge and encouraging the body to actually start working as you would want it to. So they were just a few bits that I thought about that I thought you might find interesting. And I'm just going to finish up now because we are kind of cracking on for time, as we always do, and talk a little bit about that exposome side of things, because it's something that we know is important, but also, do we actually change it? Does the vegan omega have astaxanthin? Defo spelled this wrong. No, so that would be in the Bare Biology Vim and Vigor. So in the liposomal omega, you don't need to have anything that is an antioxidant sort of protective agent, because it's not going to degrade over time because it's encapsulated in the liposome. But the Vim and Vigor does have the astaxanthin from Bare Biology, the capsule one. So yes, if we go about the exposome side of things, I talk about this a lot with people. And so if I was to classify a couple of things that I think are really important to think about if you are slightly struggling with how you feel about yourself or your sort of part in the world or whatever it is that you might be concerned about looking at, think about your support network and sort of social pressures. Are you actually in a situation where those people around you are enhancing your life? Or perhaps have you grown out of the people that you're with? A lot of us go through evolutions at different points in our lives, and we have great friends who we've had forever, but we aren't the same people anymore. So do you have appropriate and adequate support for who you are at this point in time? Social pressures. Are you, again, in a group where you feel like you have to perform? Because you don't. You are your own unique individual, and there are many different types of people out there who are waiting with open arms to celebrate everything about you that makes you unique. The way that I kind of talk about this is I refer to it as my fulfillment versus frustration ratio. There are certain things in life that we don't enjoy doing. That's absolutely fine. We just have to get on with them. But do you have equal, if not more, things that fulfill you and make you feel fantastic that just mean that those bits that you have to do don't have such a negative impact on you? I talk about this a lot with people when it comes to things like dissociative eating behaviours. So if people find that they mindlessly munch on stuff, or they really crave sweet things at one point in the afternoon, or they find that they will suddenly sort of start rampantly doing something without realising it, or procrastinating when they're working by going off and doing something else, it's a form of our brains kind of turning off so that we don't have to deal with the emotional issue that's in front of us, and then we'll look for sensation in terms of something else. So if you've got tasks that are ongoing, you might then go and decide to go and do the laundry rather than carrying on with them, because you know the laundry has a tangible end that almost feels like a weird reward, rather than sitting down and writing 2,000 words of that article that you needed to do, or problem solving something with an issue at work, or whatever it was that you needed to think about. And similarly, if you feel slightly contained, or like you don't have an outlet for your creativity, or like you aren't, I don't know, fulfilling potential or achieving enough, then you might find that when you've been sitting and doing that for a while, you breathe really shallowly, at which point you then mistake poor oxygenation for a hunger signal. So lots of different things like that. So just make sure that when you are looking at your week and where your energy output is going, make sure that you are doing the things you have to do, but also making sure that you're doing the things that you need to do to make you feel really good. As an example, when I came back after the Christmas holidays, I made myself a star chart because I was doing a really big project that had no tangible end, and it required me to sort of sit down every day and just creatively write, which I found really enjoyable, but at the same point, I needed something to tell me I'd achieved during the day. So I made a little table on my computer and I put in random things like drink X amount of water per day, take the dog for a walk, try a new recipe, etc., etc. Do a stretch session, foam roll, all the kind of things that I know that I need to be doing, and I probably would do anyway. But just because at the end of the day, I got to tick them off, I felt much better, and I woke up the next morning excited about the task that I had to be doing. But it's a way of working with our innate need for, it's not applause, but we need reward as humans. That's just that's just what people are. So little things like that. And I mean, your behaviours might manifest in different ways, but they were just a couple of the thoughts that popped into my head that I see quite a lot with my clients, and just chatting with friends and that kind of stuff as well. Other things that you do really need to be aware of as well is things like historical traumas. How do they manifest? They can manifest as odd behaviours, sort of different things, but and historical traumas as well don't necessarily need to be like big grand things. Family life can be very difficult when you're a child, and if, say, there was another sibling who wasn't particularly well or was particularly, I don't know, anxious in themselves or anything like that, any situation which alters the environment in which you've grown up, or a situation where you've lived, and these are just all random examples. You could have been at a school where you didn't feel like you particularly fit in, or people weren't really like you, or they spoke to you in a certain way. You will accumulate all of those things as part of your external exposome, and they will impact how you then interact with your modern life, or your life as it is at this point in time. So again, step outside, observe what you're doing with an outsider's eyes, and observe what you have been through, because everyone's always been through something, as an outsider would. It's just because it happened to you, and it might commonly happen to other people, doesn't mean it's normal, and it doesn't mean that you have to cope with it on your own. So do have to think about those. And then also things like exposure to toxins, molds, and pollutants. Because the wonderful thing, like I said with the tuna, fats absorb and accumulate toxins. So the nervous system, being a fat-based structure, accumulates toxins. If you have been exposed to things like mold in your home, or toxins from cleaning products, or I don't know, maybe you swam a lot in a very chlorinated pool for a long period of time, or you live in a busy industrial city, those things will all be burdens on your body to detoxify over time. So from an antioxidant perspective, your requirement for things like magnesium, anything that's going to support your liver function, your vitamin C status, your zinc status, all of those kind of things, you're going to need in vastly higher quantities than somebody who's never come into contact with those. And similarly, I mean, mold is a big topic, I can't talk about that now, but this would all swing all the way back around again to whether your digestive health is effective and whether you're getting adequate and appropriate nutrition. So on the 38-minute mark, I think this little chat has come to an end. Thank you guys for joining. Remember to have a look at the list of bits that you can get for 20% off if you want to. And I do hope that some of you will join next month, when I'm very excitingly going to be delving deeper into blood sugar regulation and conditions associated with issues with blood sugar. So whether that's hormonal bits like PCOS, metabolic concerns, all of that kind of thing, that is going to be next month. So that is the second Tuesday of February, which I think is the 7th, but don't hold me to that. And I'll see you then, and have a lovely evening or whatever, wherever you are. Let me quickly check that there weren't any other questions. I always forget to do that. But if you are watching this later, you can always put questions. Yes, do make yourself a star chart. It's amazing. For anybody who has to do anything that requires creativity or motivation, give yourself a little boost every now and again. It's like having a little self-applause thing, and it really, really helps. We should spend more time self-applauding. It makes us feel a lot better. Right. Okay. Have a lovely evening, morning, wherever you are, and I will see you soon. Bye. Bye.